think he was scared to come out the cell, or he was just like, he didn't want to be a part of that?
Well, he had to be scared because he didn't come over here with us.
But the business was blood-based because Suge was the CEO. And, you know, he had all his homies there, and at the same time.
So they got this new thing out that people sell them all the time. They got this stuff called, they get blood from somebody with AIDS, and then they shoot you with it.
Oh,
so
that seems bad.
That's a slow death.
Yeah.
Easy thing, you know what I mean?
I grew up as a blood. Like he was saying, a lot of times we have a lot of influence in these prisons. One thing that I've learned that we as Bloods and Crips in these prisons, y'all, we don't need gangbang against each other.
That's what I was speaking to. I was showing them. I was trying to illustrate, based on what we talked about, me and Suge, that, hey, man, you can come out.
Suge Knight was once the most feared man in Hollywood. Just his name was enough to send shivers down anyone's spine. But now the tables have turned, and Suge is scarred for his life. Things have gone so bad for the former music executive that he now stays hidden in his prison cell, not seeing or meeting anyone. Suge Knight's reputation precedes him. The first thing anyone hears about Suge isn't how he was once a successful music executive or the former CEO of Death Row Records, one of the most successful record labels in Hollywood. Everyone had one thing to say about him, that if you value your life, you better stay on good terms with Suge. There are many rumors of him hurting people, and even more rumors of him murdering them. There are a lot of music executives and rappers who like to act tough and appear as gangsters, but most of them are just bluffing. However, if there is one person in the industry who truly is a gangster, it's Suge Knight. Suge isn't some petty criminal who goes around threatening people. He had a proper army of goons at his service. His security staff was affiliated to a violent and horrifying gang called the Bloods.
But the business was blood-based because Suge was the CEO. And, you know, he had all his homies there, and at the same time, his homies were security.
These members of the Bloods were called Pirates, and they formed the entire security staff of Suge's. Security is a pretty mild way of putting it, as these goons did a lot more than just provide security. They terrorized anyone who dared to go against Suge. Suge Knight was a prominent figure in the East Coast versus West Coast hip-hop feud that occurred during the mid-1990s. He was involved in quite a lot of fights with Bad Boy Records as well, the record label associated with the Crips. But if you think a man like Suge can be loyal to anyone, then you're seriously wrong. He wasn't a well-wisher of the Piru Bloods either. Suge had the whole army of the Bloods with him, and he thought he was invincible. But he wasn't satisfied with this either. Suge wanted full control of the gang, and he did so by pitting members of the Bloods against each other.
Suge would create these conflicts between people. He would create drama, talk behind people's back in order to get them to turn against somebody else.
This resulted in the gang becoming weaker, which made it easier for Suge to gain control. But things escalated too quickly, even for Suge to take care of them. At one point, the internal fighting resulted in the death of 10 Blood members. This was the end of Suge's influence over the Bloods. After spending so long with the Bloods defending him, now Suge has been completely deserted by them. In fact, they are out for blood, and they will jump at Suge at the first opportunity. Not to forget the Crips, who haven't forgotten Suge's altercations with Bad Boy Records. Now that Suge is in prison, both sides have their chance at revenge. What this really means is Suge is now surrounded from both sides. Not to mention the fact that the prison is an entirely different place from the streets. Even though the Crips and the Bloods have been at each other's throats the entire time, inside the prison they get along.
I grew up as a blood. Like he was saying, a lot of times we have a lot of influence in these prisons. One thing that I've learned that we as Bloods and Crips in these prisons, y'all, we don't need gangbang against each other.
The two rival gangs are courteous with each other and do not pick fights with the opposite members. They both seem to be united by one thing, for their hatred for Suge Knight. Suge destroyed the Bloods from within and resulted in the deaths of so many, and he murdered so many Crips because it was the rival gang in the streets. Now, when both of them are after Suge, he suddenly has no place to hide. Things have now gotten so bad for Suge that he can't even leave his prison room.
You think he was scared to come out the cell, or he was just like, he didn't want to be a part of that?
Well, he had to be scared because he didn't come over here with us.
Prisoner, who shared a wall with Suge, talked about how paranoid and scared Suge had become. He had completely withdrawn within himself and is currently in protective custody.
That's what I was speaking to. I was showing them. I was trying to illustrate, based on what we talked about, me and Suge, that, hey, man, you can come out.
Even Suge's son is worried for his father's safety and health. According to him, solitary confinement alone will drive his father crazy. Well, they're obviously trying to break his spirit. It's simple stuff, not giving him utensils for food, not allowing him TV time. All they're doing is keeping him in solitary confinement and keeping him locked away by himself. Anyone knows that alone will make somebody go crazy. I acknowledge my father for staying strong for that. Looks like the terror that was once Suge Knight is no longer present. In fact, Suge is himself worried for his life and hiding behind prison walls. This doesn't make us forget everything that Suge did before. He always had pretty cruel methods of keeping people in check. He'd give weird and horrible punishments to his employees, and because of his violent nature, they had no choice but to suffer in silence.
This guy had to pee. Okay. They just, Suge pop him up a little bit. Pop, 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 pop. Then sit him down in the bathroom. And then, where's the bucket? Get that bucket. You got to drink this, or I'm just going to whoop your ass. For real.
One journalist also recounted the horrific things that took place at Suge's office. If Suge felt someone was trying to cheat him, the offender would be dragged into a storeroom by his goons and pounded to a bloody pulp. Death row employees went about their filing and faxing as blood-curdling shrieks filled the office. They saw the doorknob jerking, knowing that people were desperately trying to escape a beating. Picking up a fight with Suge, or even daring to leave his label, resulted in a full-fledged gang war against you. He sent a whole convoy of 50 men to disrupt Snoop Dogg's event after the rapper left Suge's label. Bodyguard Big Nas recalled the stressful incident. The scariest moment is when we went to Hawaii. When the plane landed, we were greeted by 20 Honolulu police officers, and they told us the death row is here. They tried to hem Snoop Dogg up. Suge Knight had sent 50 guys to try to break up the show. Of course, no one is partying when there are 50 goons ready to pounce on you at the first order from Suge Knight. When we got there, vacation mode was over. We were locking and loading, putting on bulletproof vests with their wives and girlfriends sitting next to them. We had to have Interscope pick up the tab to put Honolulu police with each bodyguard because of how deep Suge was over there. Snoop Dogg wasn't the only rapper who had to suffer at the hands of Suge. In fact, there have been others with much worse fates. People suspect that Eazy-Z, a famous rapper who died in 1995, didn't die a natural death as they had previously suspected. The rapper passed away from AIDS-induced pneumonia. How could it possibly be murder? Turns out, Suge cleared that confusion himself.
So they got this new thing out that people sell them all the time. They got this stuff called, they get blood from somebody with AIDS, and then they shoot you with it.
Oh,
so
that seems bad.
That's a slow death.
Yeah.
Easy thing, you know what I mean?
Of course, there are people who still want to think the best of Suge. Rapper Ice Cube thinks his theory is way too bizarre to be true, and that there is no way Suge could have just injected AIDS into his enemies himself. He said, "How would he do that? Nah, I think if somebody poke you with one of them goddamn needles, you'll know. You'll know." But Suge admitting so himself in an interview is a pretty big hint about him actually doing it, don't you think? If you still have any confusion about how dangerous Suge Knight used to be and how much terror he had, listen to this story Ice Cube recalled. Apparently, Suge had the crazy idea that if you threaten people to murder them, suddenly all their creativity will start flowing and their art block will just magically disappear. Ice Cube recalled, Suge had an apartment full of producers, Cube said. I guess they wasn't coming up with the right songs, and he gathered them all up and said, look, either y'all start producing some hits, or I'ma start producing some hits. Suge is now in prison for murdering 2 people in what he claims was an accident, but witnesses claim otherwise. One person told the reporters the whole incident that paints Suge exactly as the kind of cruel and violent person as we think he is. He recalled, then he puts the truck in drive, drives forward, running over him, and then keeps going forward and keeps on driving and runs over Carter, who is standing in the parking lot, and keeps on going after that. People think that it is about time Suge paid for all his past crimes. It's no surprise that he has created enemies for himself in both Bloods and Crips. One person wrote, he finally got caught. So many things he did should have put him behind bars. Karma finally caught up to him. That's it for today, folks. Until next time, goodbye.